I never believed in ghosts. Not the way some people do, not the dramatic, cinematic kind where candlelight flickers and doors slam themselves shut and pale women float down staircases in white gowns. That was all theater to me. Entertainment. Something human beings invented to make the darkness feel less random, less indifferent, less terrifyingly meaningless. Not the way my grandmother believed in them either. She was a small woman with enormous eyes and a habit of lowering her voice whenever the subject turned to things that couldn't be explained. She grew up in a house at the edge of a forest in rural Georgia, and she claimed that the woods behind the property were full of things that didn't belong to the living world anymore. She'd describe them casually, the way other people describe weather as facts, not fictions. Spirits that wandered empty roads at night, drawn to crossroads and sharp bends in highways. Dead relatives who appeared beside the beds of sleeping family members in the hours before dawn, not to frighten anyone, but simply to say goodbye one final time before moving on to wherever it was the dead eventually went. Every family gathering turned into a competition. Everyone had a story. Everyone swore on their mother's life, on their father's grave, on the souls of their children. Aunt Patrice claimed she saw her dead husband standing in her kitchen 2 nights after the funeral, just making coffee like nothing had happened. My cousin Jerome swore a dark figure followed him home for 3 consecutive nights after he attended an open casket viewing. My mother's older sister insisted that her childhood home had a room nobody could sleep in, not because it looked disturbing, but because everyone who tried woke up at exactly the same hour, feeling a weight pressing down on their chest and a certainty that someone was standing at the foot of the bed. I always laughed, not cruelly. I wasn't trying to dismiss them. I simply found it impossible to believe that the universe worked that way, that something as chaotic and biological as death could leave behind a coherent echo, a personality, a presence with intentions. When you're gone, you're gone. That's what I believed. That's what I told myself every time another impossible story circled the dinner table. Back then, I was certain that every strange thing had a logical explanation. Grief distorts perception. Sleep deprivation causes hallucinations. The human mind is a pattern recognition machine operating in an information-sparse environment. Of course, it fills the gaps with faces, with figures, with meaning. Of course, a grieving widow thinks she sees her husband in the kitchen. Of course, a frightened child thinks something is following him home. That's not the supernatural. That's just being human. I was very confident about all of this. Now, I'm not so sure anymore. Because 3 years ago, while working the night shift at a gas station outside of Pine Ridge County, I saw something I cannot explain to this day. Something that has permanently recalibrated the way I understand the world and everything that may or may not exist just past its visible edges. And the worst part, the part that removes any remaining possibility of self-delusion, is that I wasn't the only one who saw it. I was 23 at the time and completely, desperately broke. College hadn't worked out the way anyone planned. I dropped out halfway through my second year after my father suffered a cardiac event that left him partially disabled and buried the family under medical bills that none of us had the savings to absorb. My mother, who had worked part-time as a school administrator for most of my childhood, picked up double shifts at a diner 3 towns over. She came home every night smelling of grease and coffee, too tired to do anything except eat a little and sleep. I needed money fast. I needed it in a way that bypassed the luxury of being selective about where it came from. So I took the first job I could find. The station was called Redwood Fuel Stop. It sat just off Highway 16, roughly 20 minutes outside the nearest town, if you were driving the speed limit and not stopping for anything. The surrounding area was the kind of place that real estate listings describe charitably as rural, which is a polite way of saying that the nearest neighbor was half a mile away, the nearest grocery store was 12 miles, and at certain hours of the night you could stand in the parking lot and see more stars than you'd ever seen in your life because there was absolutely nothing else around to compete with them. The station itself was old, not charmingly old, not historically old, just worn and tired in the way that things get when they've been moderately neglected for decades. The canopy over the pumps was slightly buckled on one side. The restroom keys were attached to enormous plastic blocks so customers couldn't walk off with them. Though, honestly, the restrooms were the kind that people actively tried to avoid. The walk-in cooler at the back of the store groaned constantly, cycling through a sound that resembled nothing so much as a slow, labored exhale. During the day, it looked normal enough. Tired, but normal. Truckers pulled through. Families on road trips stretched their legs at the picnic table nobody had cleaned in what appeared to be months. High schoolers from town drove out to buy chips and sodas because the station didn't ask too many questions. At night, though, it felt wrong in a way that was difficult to articulate but impossible to ignore. The fluorescent lights above the pumps buzzed with a high, constant insect frequency that made the air feel pressurized and strange. Half the parking lot lamps were either dead or in various stages of failing flickering on and off in irregular patterns that the eyes kept involuntarily tracking. Beyond the outermost edge of the station's light, there was nothing except trees. Dense, uniformly dark trees pressing right up to the property line, absorbing everything. No houses, no other commercial buildings, no street lights on the highway itself, just woods, endless and indifferent and black. The night shift paid $2 more per hour than the day shift, which at the time felt like a reasonable explanation for why the position was always available, always unfilled, cycling through new hires every few months. Now I understand why. My shift ran from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., 8 hours. Most of it quiet. Truck drivers stopped for coffee and sometimes for conversation, men and women who operated on schedules that had permanently separated them from normal sleeping hours, who were strangely philosophical about solitude and darkness and the particular character of roads at 3 a.m. I liked them. They talked without needing much back. Teenagers came in groups, nervous energy and bad decisions, buying energy drinks and snack cakes and occasionally trying to convince me to sell them beer, which I never did, partly because I needed the job and partly because most of them were clearly 16 and trying desperately to seem older. Drunk people wandered in after parties, eyes soft and movements liquid, buying water and hot dogs, and sometimes falling asleep briefly in the plastic chairs near the lottery machine before their friends came in looking for them. Nothing unusual happened for the first 3 weeks, at least not in any way I recognized as unusual at the time. The first time I saw him was on a Thursday night, 2:13 a.m. I remember the exact time because I was already looking at the clock on the wall behind the register killing time, counting minutes when the security monitor on the counter flickered briefly, and I glanced over at it out of reflex. The station had 4 cameras. One mounted above the pumps, covering the full range of the fueling area from a high angle. One inside the store, positioned in the back corner and angled to cover most of the floor space. One mounted at the rear of the building, pointing toward the dumpsters and the small delivery area. One aimed at the highway entrance, the cut in the tree line where vehicles pulled off the road and followed the access lane toward the pumps. The monitor displayed all 4 feeds in a split-screen grid. When the screen flickered, I glanced at the pump camera and saw him, a man standing beside pump number 4, perfectly still. At first I thought nothing of it. Customers sometimes pulled up to the pumps and stood there for a moment before starting the fueling process, checking their phones, stretching, watching a notification load. Normal behavior. I probably wouldn't have kept looking if something about him hadn't immediately registered as slightly wrong in a way I couldn't immediately name. He wasn't pumping gas. There was no vehicle beside him. He wasn't looking at his phone, wasn't stretching, wasn't oriented toward the store in any way that suggested he was about to come inside and make a purchase. He was simply standing there beside the pump with his head slightly lowered, arms loose at his sides, facing nothing in particular. Motionless. I leaned closer to the monitor. The image quality on those cameras was not great grainy, slightly washed out by the overhead lighting. The colors slightly wrong in the way of cheap digital systems from the previous decade. I could make out a dark jacket, something on the shoulder that might have been a patch or an emblem of some kind. What appeared to be heavy work boots, the kind with thick soles, the kind people wore when they worked outdoors in rough conditions. His face was in shadow. The angle of the camera and the positioning of the overhead lamp conspired to keep his features unreadable. I watched him for 30 seconds. He didn't move. I picked up the microphone connected to the external speaker system. "Sir?" "Nothing. Sir, are you okay out there?" No response. No movement. I sighed, noted the time 2:14 a.m. now, and walked out from behind the counter. The automatic doors slid open with their usual mechanical groan. Cold air hit me immediately, sharper than it had any right to be for the time of year, carrying with it the smell of pine and something else, something damp and slightly organic. The parking lot was completely empty. Pump number 4 stood alone under the flickering overhead light, its digital display dark, its hose hanging unused in the cradle. No man, no car, no disturbance of any kind. I stood there for a moment, genuinely confused. I checked around the side of the building, walked far enough toward the tree line to establish that nobody had ducked behind the dumpsters or into the shadows at the property edge. Nobody. When I went back inside, I looked immediately at the monitor. Pump 4, empty. The image was steady, no flicker, no distortion, no indication that anything unusual had just occurred. I decided the camera had glitched. Produced a ghost image, a frame artifact, some technical hiccup. I noted it mentally as something to mention to my manager, and went back to counting minutes. I was wrong to let it go so easily. He came back the following night, 2:13 a.m. exactly. Same position, same pump, same absolute stillness. This time I didn't immediately get up to go outside. Something made me hesitate, not fear exactly, not yet. More like a careful attentiveness, an instinct that told me to watch before acting. I leaned toward the monitor. The grain in the image seemed worse around his figure, specifically a localized distortion, like a heat shimmer, though it was 40 degrees outside and there was no logical source of thermal distortion at a gas pump at 2 a.m. I picked up the microphone. "Hello? Sir?" No response. And then something happened that sent a cold, deliberate chill from the base of my neck down through my shoulders. The man moved. Not quickly. Not naturally. He turned his head toward the camera with a slowness that felt entirely mechanical, the way you might turn a heavy dial. Degree by careful degree, until I had the distinct and horrible impression that he was looking directly into the lens, not at the station, not in the general direction of the building, into the camera, into me. I couldn't see his face clearly. The shadows were too deep, the image quality too poor, but I knew he was looking at me. I went outside immediately this time, through the groaning automatic doors out into the cold parking lot. Empty. I stood there for almost a full minute, scanning the lot, the tree line, the highway. Nothing moving anywhere. The only sound was the buzzing of the overhead lights and the distant, continuous susurrus of wind moving through the pines. When I went back inside and looked at the monitor, the pump camera showed nothing but empty pavement and the motionless pump. He was gone. By the third consecutive night, I had crossed from confusion into something I was reluctant to name. I told Marcus about it during shift change. Marcus had been working the station for 4 years and had the specific, weathered composure of someone who had been bored and slightly frightened in the same place for long enough that the two sensations had merged into a kind of permanent, low-level vigilance. He laughed. "You're working too many nights, man. Your brain starts doing things." I'm telling you, Marcus, I watched him turn and look at the camera, and then he was gone when I went outside. Probably a homeless guy. We get them sometimes, they hear the outdoor speaker and they bolt. He disappears the second I step out the door. Fast homeless guy. I'm serious. Marcus poured coffee from the machine that had been burning the same pot for approximately 6 hours and gave me a look that was equal parts amusement and mild concern. Ghosts don't buy gas, bro. I tried to laugh. It came out wrong. That night, I made a decision. I positioned my phone on the counter, propped against a coffee cup, angled directly at the monitor. If he came back, I was going to record it. At 2:13 a.m., the monitor flickered. He appeared. Same position, same pump, same terrible stillness. I filmed for nearly 2 full minutes, narrating quietly, establishing the time and location for whatever record I was apparently now keeping. And then every light in the station went out. Not a gradual failure, not a flickering decline, a sudden, total, simultaneous extinction. One moment fully lit, the next absolute darkness. The kind that has weight, the kind that presses against your eyes. It lasted approximately 3 seconds. When the lights came back, I grabbed the phone and looked at the monitor. He was no longer at pump 4. He was standing halfway between the pump island and the front entrance of the store, 20 feet closer than he had been. Standing beneath the overhead lights, head lowered, motionless. I had not seen him move. I had watched the screen during the blackout as best I could, and there had been nothing to see in the darkness. But even accounting for that 3 seconds of darkness does not provide enough time to cover 20 feet and resume a pose of perfect stillness. He had not walked there. He was simply there. And then the automatic doors rattled. Not opened, rattled. A brief, sharp vibration in the frame, as if something had pressed against the glass from outside without quite enough force to trigger the sensor. Except the motion sensor beeped once, which meant something was there, at the threshold, on the outside of the door, within sensor range, standing still enough not to trigger the opening mechanism, but close enough that the sensor registered presence. I backed away from the counter. I did not make a sound. The doors did not open. The sensor did not beep again. Then the lights flickered once. And when they steadied, the monitor showed an empty parking lot. I spent the rest of the shift with my back against the wall behind the register, watching both the doors and the monitor with the specific, exhausting attention of someone who has understood that they are in a situation they do not have adequate tools to handle. I didn't sleep the following day, not meaningfully. I kept replaying the phone footage, watching the figure appear at the pump, watching the blackout swallow the image, watching the lights return to reveal him 20 feet closer with no intervening movement. I watched it 11 times. The quality was poor phone camera pointed at a low-resolution security monitor, grain layered on grain, but the figure was undeniably there, undeniably closer after the blackout, undeniably wrong. I almost quit that afternoon. I called my mother instead, which was its own kind of mistake, because I couldn't tell her what was actually happening, and so I just listened to her talk about her own exhaustion and the bills that were still coming and the reduction in her hours that the diner had just announced. And I thought about the $2 extra per hour that came with the night shift, and I went back to work. The sightings continued every night for the following 2 weeks. Always 2:13 a.m., always pump, number 4 as the initial position. Sometimes he stood motionless for the entire duration. I observed him and then vanished when I went outside or when the lights flickered. Sometimes, during or after a flicker, he appeared closer. Twice he appeared at the edge of the camera's field, partially out of frame, as if circling the station's perimeter at a distance I couldn't quite track. Once, during a particularly heavy rain, I saw his face for the first time. That was the night everything changed in a fundamental way. The rain had been building for hours before my shift started, not a typical autumn rain, but something heavier, more insistent, the kind that makes roof lines rattle and turns parking lots into shallow lakes and reduces visibility to the nearest 50 feet. I drove to the station through it with both hands on the wheel and arrived to find the lot already pooling, the overhead lights reflecting off the water in that disorienting way that makes flat ground look bottomless. The station was empty all night, not a single customer between midnight and 2 a.m. Just me and the rain and the buzzing lights and the groan of the cooler in the back. 2:13, the monitor distorted. He appeared, standing in the rain, directly under the pump lights. His jacket darkened with water, his boots invisible beneath a reflective shimmer of pooled light on the pavement. Still, completely, impossibly still, in a way that no living person would be. No adjusting of posture, no reflexive movement against the cold or the discomfort of being soaked, no human fidget or shiver. I reached forward and used the camera controls to zoom in slightly on his position. That was when I saw his face for the first time. Pale skin, the specific waxy pallor of something that had been deprived of color for a long time. Sunken eyes, the sockets deeper than they should be, the eyes themselves difficult to read at this resolution and distance, but somehow clearly wrong, somehow clearly empty. And his mouth was open in a smile that I do not have precise language to describe accurately. It was too wide. Not grotesquely so, not the cartoonish rictus of horror movie imagery, but wide in a way that suggested the expression was not being made voluntarily, that something was holding his face in that position from behind the skin, from inside the bone, stretching it just past the range of natural human expression. A smile that looked like pain wearing the costume of joy. I stumbled backward. Every monitor in the station shut off simultaneously. Every light in the store followed the overheads, the cooler lights, the neon signs in the window, all of it, leaving only the emergency lights above the exit doors, which were on a separate battery circuit and which produced a thin, reddish, insufficient glow that made everything the inside of something. And then I heard footsteps outside, slow, crunching deliberately across the gravel at the edge of the pavement where the parking lot met the landscaping. A sound you only hear in deep silence, a sound that carries weight and intention. Moving toward the building, I did not move. The automatic doors slid open. Rain blew through the opening in a flat sheet, carrying the smell of pine and wet earth and something else, something I could not name, something that seemed to belong to deep water or deep soil rather than to open air. No one entered, but I heard breathing. Just outside the open doorway, deep and uneven and wet, the breathing of something that had difficulty with the mechanical business of drawing and releasing air, something for whom respiration was no longer a reflex but an effort. The doors stayed open for 4 seconds, then they closed. The footsteps stopped, and when I looked at the floor, I saw that rain had blown in during those 4 seconds and pooled just inside the entrance in a rough pattern, and at the near edge of that pattern, perfectly formed in the thin film of water on the linoleum, were 2 boot prints, facing inward, motionless, as if something had stepped inside and stopped. The monitors returned to life. The store lights followed. The parking lot was empty. I walked to the entrance, crouched down, and looked at the boot prints for a long time. They were deep-treaded, heavy work boots, the kind people wore when they worked outdoors in rough conditions. I went outside and vomited on the pavement. The next morning I showed Marcus everything. The phone footage, the boot prints, which I had photographed before mopping, the timeline of appearances going back 3 weeks. Marcus didn't laugh. He watched the footage twice without speaking. Then he paused it on the closest frame that captured the man's jacket. There, that patch on the shoulder. I looked, faded, partially obscured by shadow and grain and water, but visible a rectangular emblem of some kind, official looking. My uncle used to talk about an accident around here, Marcus said. Years ago, before I started, he knew some of the regular truckers who stopped here, and one of them mentioned it once, I think, a worker on the highway who got hit and killed. I drove to the county library that afternoon instead of sleeping. The elderly librarian who helped me navigate the archive of digitized newspaper back issues had the specific patience and competence of someone who had spent decades helping people find things they weren't sure they were looking for. She didn't ask many questions. She just helped me search We found the article in 40 Minutes, Pine Ridge County Gazette, the 18th of October, 1997. Highway worker killed in hit and run near Redwood Station. The victim's name was Daniel Mercer, 34 years old. Employed by the County Highway Maintenance Department, assigned to night work on a stretch of Highway 16 that included the access road to the gas station and the immediate surrounding area. According to the article, his body had been discovered near the station in the early hours of a stormy October morning. He had been struck by a vehicle that did not stop. The driver was never identified. The case had remained open and officially unsolved. The article included a photograph, black and white, the slightly smudged quality of newspaper reproduction, a man in a work jacket, a patch on the shoulder highway department insignia, a face that looked directly into whatever camera had taken the picture with a faint, tight expression that might have been a smile or might have been a squint against the light. I recognized him immediately. My hands were shaking so badly that I had to set the printout flat on the table to keep it steady enough to see. That night I brought a handgun to work. I kept it in the space beneath the register where normally there was a fire extinguisher. I knew it was irrational. Whatever I had been watching on the monitor for 3 weeks was not something a handgun was designed for. But rationality is a daytime condition. At night, in that station, with that buzzing light and those black trees and that knowledge sitting in my chest like swallowed ice, I needed the weight of it. I needed to be holding something. The rain had returned. By midnight, the parking lot was a lake again. Every light doubled in the water. 2:12 a.m. I watched the monitor without blinking. The pump camera was still. The entrance camera was still. 2:13. The monitor distorted violently. Not the subtle flicker of previous appearances, but a full-frame burst of static lines of interference crashing across the image like waves. When it cleared, he was not at pump 4. He was directly outside the front doors, standing in the rain 3 feet from the entrance, head lowered, wearing that smile, standing where I would have had to walk past him to get to my car. My chest compressed. Then slowly, with that same mechanical deliberateness I had seen before, he raised one arm, straightened his index finger, and pointed not at me, not at the camera, not forward, but behind me, at something in the store at my back. I turned. Empty aisle. Shelves of chips and crackers and motor oil additives. Nothing. When I turned back to the monitor, every screen was black. The store went dark simultaneously, and the automatic doors opened. This time, footsteps entered the store. I heard them moving down the center aisle, slow, wet, the specific heavy tread of someone in thick-soled work boots on linoleum, moving without urgency. Moving as if they belonged there and had all the time in the world. The footsteps stopped somewhere near the third aisle. I was pressed against the back wall with my hand on the gun. The red emergency lights produced just enough illumination to suggest shapes without revealing them. Then the voice came, soft, broken, produced with obvious effort, the way words come out of a person who is trying to speak through damage, through obstruction, through something badly wrong with the mechanism of speech. He never stopped. I cannot describe accurately what it did to me to hear those words and that voice in that darkness. I can tell you that the gun in my hand felt suddenly meaningless and that my legs stopped working properly. He left me there. A long, rattling sound followed, not quite a cough, not quite a sob. Something biological and wrong. Then, silence. The emergency lights brightened slightly. Normal power returned in a slow surge. Standing at the end of the third aisle was the man from the cameras. He was close enough that I could see him without the mediation of a monitor. Close enough to see that his clothes were soaked through, dark with water, and that water dripped steadily from the hem of his jacket onto the linoleum. Close enough to see that his head was wrong on the left side, slightly concave in a way that human skulls are not meant to be. The kind of damage that doesn't happen from illness, but from impact, from something hitting with speed and weight and no warning. His eyes were black. Not dark brown, not very dark black. The color of pupils expanded to their absolute limit, leaving no iris visible at all. And the smile? The smile was worse in person than on any monitor. I won't describe it again. I don't want to. He raised his right hand slowly, trembling with the effort, and pointed toward the highway. The way a person points at something they have been trying to show someone for a very long time. Then he was gone. Not slowly, not gradually, instantly, completely, absolutely there and then not there, like a thought you can't quite hold on to. I ran outside and was sick again on the pavement. I called my manager from the parking lot at 3 a.m. and told him I was leaving and would not be returning. He was angry. I drove home through the rain without being able to fully account for the 20-minute journey. I quit formally the next morning. 3 days later, there was a knock at my apartment door. 2 police officers. The older one did most of the talking. He was careful with his words in the way that cops get careful when they're not sure how a conversation is going to go. Was I working the station on Tuesday night? Yes. Did I notice anything unusual? I asked him why he was asking first. He and his partner exchanged a look, the specific look that passes between 2 people who have agreed that one of them is going to say something and neither of them is entirely comfortable with it. A drunk driver had gone off the road, he told me. Half a mile north of the station, around 2:30 a.m. during the storm, into the tree line at the shoulder of Highway 16. The driver had survived, banged up but alive. He'd been transported to Pine Ridge County Hospital and had been interviewed there. So? I said. He claims a man standing in the middle of the road caused the accident. He swerved to avoid him. Every hair on my body stood at attention. What did he look like? I asked, though I already knew. The officer pulled out his phone and showed me an image, a police sketch, clean lines on white paper, produced from the driver's description, dark jacket. Highway worker's patch on the shoulder, a face with sunken eyes and a smile that the sketch artist had clearly struggled with, had approximated rather than captured, because some expressions resist being drawn accurately. I recognized him, Daniel Mercer. Dead for 27 years, still on the highway at 2 a.m., still pointing toward the road. The driver, according to the officers, had been repeating one sentence at the hospital, over and over through shock and sedation and the careful questions of medical staff. He wanted me to stop. The officers assumed he was drunk and had hallucinated a pedestrian. That was the official position. That was what the incident report would say.